Good morning. Good morning. Happy Monday for all of you guys. We were talking about how it's my favorite Monday today because I had
Sleep.
probably it was just 8 hours, but still it was like amazing sleep. So I'm rested and ready to go today. Hope all of you guys that our fathers had an amazing Father's Day yesterday. We started out this conversation today with an epic dad joke from the dorky dad over here, right?
Yeah. I do my best. I try to stay in front of things.
I'm Kimberly. This is Zach. We are your hosts today for Monday Mondays on the Daily Huddle. And today we have a great topic for you. So today the topic is rent versus buy. It's the ultimate home decision showdown. What should I do, right? So anyway, I want to chat about that a little bit today.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, depending on obviously which generation or era you come from, or from where you get your sources of information, right now it's a real hot topic and has been for the last several years for younger generations that renting is the way to go. And there are factors that play into that. So we want to talk about what factors should you consider between renting and buying? What makes buying the right choice versus renting, and when is renting the right choice? And for a lot of times in our career, we've talked to people about renting being the wrong choice all the time. And I still kind of feel that way, but I've with interest rate environments and the things that are going on right now that are a little different, that might not be the case for every single person looking for somewhere to live at the moment. So we're going to talk about the pros and the cons. We'll talk about what comes with renting versus buying, and go into that. And then we'll have a little Q&A at the end. So don't know where you want to get started with that. You want to start with one topic or the other, or you want to just do a pros and cons and kind of go through
I'm
it?
going to do a pros and cons and let's go through it. I think there are a lot of pros and cons, and I think we probably all have our stories about pros and cons. So maybe we should start there. Maybe we should tell stories, right? Our very first house. You want to talk about that?
Our first house that we bought, not the first place we rented. Okay, we'll talk about that.
Yes. But the first place that we bought slash built.
Yeah, so we were new home buyers. Both of us had just freshly graduated from college, which is one of the things that you would consider when you're shopping for somewhere to live. We've had kids go through college that lived on campus, that rented off campus, and then ultimately we bought a house with our oldest daughter to help her finish out her college career. So that movement will go through one piece at a time. But our first house that we bought, we were both like I said, new college graduates. We had our contracts were signed, which was to teach school, which was a big part of our ability to buy. We had to be able to prove future income. So we did that. We went shopping, and we were all the way back to the story of where we were looking and going. And we're not going into all that. Let's talk about the house that we bought.
So we're just going to talk about the cost of it, right?
Yeah.
So we bought our first house, and actually we built our first house, but
Didn't mean to. That was an accident.
Well, yeah, I guess that's a good lesson, right? So we bought our first house and we had no money. And when I tell you no money, I mean no money. Zach said we were teachers, but we weren't.
Not
We
yet.
had contracts to be teachers. So we had no money coming in yet, and nothing had started, but it was coming, and we knew it was coming, and we had to have somewhere to live up there. We couldn't find what we wanted. So we found this amazing little A-frame cabin on this little, not a river, this little
It was a creek,
stream,
but it was
this little
nice.
creek,
Very, very
and
nice. You could
it
hear it
was
running.
beautiful. You could hear it. We were in Dahlonega, Georgia, right in the middle of the woods, and it was this perfect quintessential little place. And in our minds, we thought, well, we're going to live here. We had one daughter at the time. We're like, we're going to live here. It's going to be amazing, and it's affordable enough that at some point it can be our cabin, and then we can afford to buy another house, right? But remember, we had no money. So when you have no money, you make deals and you negotiate with people and you try to get things cheaper than you would typically do because you have no money, right? And so we had
a friend, a friend of a friend that was a self-proclaimed home inspector come do a home inspection, check out the property, and his background led us to believe that he knew what he was looking at. And long story short, we went through this process with his green light.
Bought it, so excited. We were just going to go in and remodel it. It literally an A-frame cabin. We were just
Yeah.
going to, bring it up to livable.
So we go in and we start looking at fixing some decks and doing some other things on this property that we were going to getting ready to move into. And the A-frame cabin was sitting on creosote timbers, aka railroad cross ties.
Like posts.
And that was the foundation that it was raised up off of, as it was near a creek. And I think there were probably 12 or 14 of them, and at least 10 of them had active termites up and down through the timbers. So we ended up buying a lot for what we could have paid for a lot on the river, a half a mile down the road.
You say a lot. So anyway, we had to tear down that house
Yeah.
and we had to completely rebuild. So that was a very expensive buying lesson, right? And sometimes you aren't prepared for that. And then we've also had rental lessons too. When we moved to Charleston, we moved to Charleston in 2010, right after Harper was born.
Yeah.
And when we moved to Atlanta, we bought a house. We ended up driving the kids 45 minutes each way to school. And we're like, when we move to Charleston, we're gonna rent and we're gonna see where we want to be and really understand and know what it is and what this area looks like, and then we'll buy. And it was also 2010. So, the market had just crashed in real estate. We thought for sure prices were coming down more in Charleston, right? And so we spent a long time renting in Charleston, which, was volatile, I think, with a family of four. Like, do you stay? Do you go? Like, can you continue living here every single year? But also, it was not advantageous financially for us to sit and wait and watch because the market didn't come down again. So, anyway, lots of pros and cons. I'm sure all of you guys have your own stories, but I would say when you're looking at should you rent or should you buy, obviously some of the basics are your financial factors, right? So what are your upfront cost of renting versus buying, or buying versus renting? When you rent a home, you have to at minimum have first month's rent and security deposit. A lot of places want first and last month's rent and security deposit. So you have 2 to 3 times your monthly payment that you're going to have to pay out in a security deposit or in a lump sum, right? And I think a lot of times for a lot of people, an obstacle to buying is the upfront costs and the down payment. And typically on a down payment, you're going to be anywhere. There are loans that will allow you, well, some of them, if you're USDA or VA, you could get in for no money down. But typically you're going to be, minimum 3 to 5%, up to 20% if you want to avoid mortgage insurance.
And for those of you that don't know the acronyms, USDA is usually a very rural property. U.S. Department of Agriculture is the program we're talking about through the mortgage there, and then VA obviously is for people that have served in the military. They have access to a different loan program that can give them zero down. So the USDA and the VA, that's what those are. So.
But ultimately, we're looking at the difference of 2 to 3 months rent payment, or let's just say at minimum 5% of a down payment on a mortgage. And if you put those in perspective, they're probably very comparable, right? They probably are very comparable. You might have a little bit more in your down payment than you would in 3 months worth of rent, paying for your house. So then you have to think about all the other pieces that go in with that. When you're buying a home, you have the home inspections. Do not ever use a free one. Lesson learned, right? You have possibly your move-in costs, things like that, but you'd have move-in costs for your rent as well. So you have those upfront fees, and then you've got your monthly payments. So that's a difference between owning and buying as well. So your monthly payments on a rent is just your rent payment. Your monthly payment on your mortgage is your mortgage and your homeowner's insurance and your taxes that are escrowed on a monthly basis to pay that bill when it comes due. Sometimes you've got homeowners association, private mortgage insurance, which sounds like it could be more. But I know in Charleston, if you can get into a home, most of the time it's significantly cheaper to own it than it is to rent it from a rent perspective, because rent is so expensive over here. And I think we're looking Alpharetta area, a 2-bedroom apartment in Alpharetta is around $2,000 a month. And I just did a mortgage for a client in Georgia, and they were all in maybe $1,700 a month. So I do think it's still a little cheaper to rent or to buy if you can actually get into that into that purchase.
One of the things that you look at that we may talk about down the road, but that might be the long-term considerations that we're talking about. So I want to go there right now.
Yeah, talk
I'll go
about
back.
maintenance and repairs for a second.
So yeah, when it's home ownership, you can do things like buy a home warranty, and a lot of people will do that. They're fairly affordable, which will cover the major appliances in the house, dishwasher, refrigerator, air conditioning, water heater, those kind of things. So that can help with that. But ultimately, when you own the home, you own the maintenance, you own the upkeep, you own anything that breaks down. You've got to replace it, you've got to repair it, and get it back up and running again. So you have to have that emergency fund or that ability to do those kind of things. When you rent, it's kind of a convenience fee, if you will, in my opinion. You're all in, paying. You're not gaining anything from your rent other than the ability to live in that space for the next month. But you have zero worry about maintenance and upkeep and those kind of things. Now, we'll tell you that if you're renting, you want to make sure you're renting from a reputable company, from a reputable space. If you're renting from an individual homeowner, can they afford to keep things up and fix things? Do they maintain the property that you're renting well? So those are things that you need to go into consideration. Most of the time, like large corporations that own apartment complexes and those kind of things, that's not as much to worry about. But who you're renting from, somebody has the ability or the responsibility to maintain that property. And do they and can they do that properly for you when you rent that space?
But it is a big peace of mind, at least conceptually, to know that renting, you don't have to worry about maintenance and cost of repairs. It's taken care of for you, and you don't have to worry about that. I know when we first moved into this home that we're in right now, we were excited. We had this air conditioner. We bought it in 2019, I think, and the AC had just been replaced in 2016. You guys know that's expensive. It's like $10,000. Like, it's expensive to replace a whole house air conditioning unit. So we were excited. We first moved in, and like 2 weeks in, our AC went out. And we live in Charleston, South Carolina in July.
It's
And it
hot
was
and humid.
hot. And thankfully we had a warranty, but we were terrified. We were like, oh no, we just put all this money in. We just did this to buy this house, and now we're going to have to replace this. So renting is a big peace of mind from a maintenance perspective and a repair perspective. But let's talk about long-term considerations, and let's talk about the difference between equity and investment, because I think that's a long-term consideration. Obviously, when you rent, no equity is being built, and your payments don't contribute to ownership. There are some things that you can do, like you could do a lease purchase with your landlord if you chose to buy that house and they were willing to sell it to you later, or an owner finance that created equity. But just your traditional rentals don't create equity, right? You exchange your monthly payment for a place to live, monthly payment, place to live, monthly payment, place to live. When you purchase a home, you actually are building equity and an investment in that, typically, right? Unless we're in that 2008 moment. But even after that, as long as you can, I know that's always a big caveat to throw out, but even, even since 2008, if you can afford to hold on to it, then the equity typically comes back. But over time, you're building equity in that property, whether it's because you're slowly paying it down in your mortgage payment, or because the market around you is growing and just dictating, more money.
The other piece to that I was going to throw out, and I don't see it on our notes, so I'll throw it out real quickly, is that when you think about long-term reasons for buying, it can be part of, and it should be considered part of your investment portfolio, part of your future retirement income, if you will. There are many ways to convert home equity into retirement income, and
whether it's your primary home or an investment property.
Absolutely. So you can sell the property if you want to live there forever. You can use a reverse mortgage. There are tools where you can take that equity and turn it into income later. But I want you to think about buying a house in a very different way when I throw this out there. If I want to take $10,000 and I want to buy an asset, a piece of real property, if you will, that's going to grow for me over time, if I want that to be gold, I've got to take $10,000 and I'm going to buy $10,000 worth of gold that's going to grow at that rate. A real estate and a mortgage combination is something that allows an investor to do something that most other things don't allow you to do. Whereas I can take $10,000 and put it down on a mortgage, and for math's sake, I can have a $100,000 asset appreciating for me. That any growth in that asset over and above what I owe on the property is my growth. So it's a way where instead of taking $10,000 and buying a real property like a gold or some sort of a commodity that's growing at just that $10,000 amount, or even a Bitcoin or something like that, where I put in 10,000, I have 10,000 worth of that growing, I can actually invest 10,000 up front and have 100,000, or depending on the loan program, 200,000 worth of an asset growing for me. So from a long-term investment process, not necessarily what you think about when you need to find somewhere to live right now, right? But when it comes to the long-term thought process of your whole portfolio, that's why buying could matter. That's why buying could help, is because it can leverage that money to grow faster, if you will.
Yeah, and I definitely think it should be considered that. We talk to families all the time, and you guys know because you've heard me say it a million times, but my very first question, is about their goals and dreams and who do you want to be when you grow up and what does this look like to you? And in the past, we had a lot of people saying that they're going to live in their home forever. Um, but I don't think that that's reality anymore for most people. Even if you think you're going to live in your home forever, you probably aren't going to live in your home forever, right? Even if it's a generational home, you're probably passing it to someone else. At some point, you're going to live somewhere else. So I do think that as emotional as our home, as our primary residence can be, we have to think about it as a math equation too. And we have to understand what that does for our overall portfolio and how our assets grow for sure.
A lot of the times with a forever home too, the next question is, do any of your kids want the home? Because a lot of kids will have nostalgia towards the parents' home, especially if they lived in it for their entire life. But if the parents aren't living in it, or if the parents aren't there anymore, that home is not where those kids and their families want to move back into anymore. The way of the world has changed. We're a very mobile society. We move all over the world, not just all over the town. So all those types of thought processes need to be, I won't say taken out of the equation, but certainly put over to the side and consider the math and consider
the whole picture
separately.
And while we're talking about moving and mobility is a big decision between renting versus buying, right? If I'm going to live somewhere for a year, I probably shouldn't buy. Chances are I might hit the market correctly, right? Where I buy it and we have this crazy appreciation that we had in 21 and 22, right? And then we're like, hey, that was a great decision. That was a great idea. But most of the time, you're not going to have that significant growth from year to year. So then you're just waiting to recoup all that money that you put back down. You do have those expenses, but if you're going to be somewhere for a minute, then that's when it makes a decision. Or if you're willing to buy it and then rent it to someone else, right? As you move somewhere else, then that's a deciding factor. But I think definitely mobility. Buying, you probably want to be there or at least hold it 5 to 7 years. Renting, you can move as often as your lease says that you can move. And sometimes that matters, right? Having that flexibility. But I'll also tell you, renting from a family perspective, like I mentioned, when we first moved to Charleston, we rented and we had 4 young girls and they were all in school, and schools mattered, right? Because they were in public school, which meant you had to live in a certain area. And that was very stressful from year to year because we rented from a, private individual because we had 4 kids, right? We didn't want to live in an apartment. We wanted to live in a home. And every year the market continued to increase. And so it was either, are they going to sell to capitalize on all this equity they have, or are they going to significantly increase the rent where we can't afford it? And either way, then we were looking for somewhere to move again that held 4 kids and us and, all this kind of stuff. So it can be stressful too, having the flexibility of renting. Another thing to consider when you're buying versus renting is market conditions, right? Right now, it might be a market condition where you're interested in renting instead of buying because the interest rates are higher. I will also tell you, obviously, you guys know I do mortgages and have for 21 years. So on the flip side of that, you will always, at some point, I'm sure, rates will come back down, and then you have the ability to refinance. And, at least in the Charleston market, not rates, but property values continue to rise regardless of rates. So that's something to think about. But it is a market condition, right? Maybe the interest rate puts buying unaffordable. Maybe you can't buy right now because the house that you would need to buy and the value of that house, the interest rates make it unaffordable. But a buyer's market with low interest rates, I think, would be a great time to buy. A seller's market, where interest rates are a little higher than, and maybe you think the real estate values are going to decline, then maybe you rent for a minute. I don't really think real estate values are going to decline at least significantly enough to make a financial decision based off of it. But you never know, right? And then I think we go to our personal preferences, right? And our lifestyle. We talked a little bit about that stability versus flexibility. For us, at that point in our life, the stability for our kids and our family and the school system, and just to know that um, factor, I guess, was off the plate, and we didn't have to think about every year, like, can we stay? Do we have to go? What are we looking for? Are we packing all this up again and moving it again? Versus the stability from buying, that was a big factor to us. But you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, I mean and for me it's kind of different. When we rented, there were several things that needed maintenance that needed to be fixed in the houses that we were in, or that I just wanted to change, and it limited my ability for those kind of things. Now I will say we bought this house in 2019, and I immediately started tearing down walls and tearing up floors, and it's been a construction zone ever since. So, but those were some of the factors that I want to make a space mine, and we talked about that early on. It also gives you that, somewhat of a nesting thing when you have your kids and you have your everything in one place, and you have control of it. You know what's coming, right? At least from that perspective, nobody's going to tell you that, which happened in our last house, when we were renting, is the family decided they wanted to move back into their home because markets in Charleston where their kids were at a point where they wanted to move
They
back,
had 30 days.
and they gave us
And
30
that
days
was well
notice.
within their rights.
Yeah.
But
But we're gonna retake our property in 30 days. So you guys have 30 days to find somewhere else that holds 4 kids and is in the right school district and everything else. So that was a big relief for us when we did finally decide to buy over here, because it meant, hey, this is what we're gonna get, this is what we got, and it's ours. And so stability and market conditions, both can play into that at that point in time. And I really think that, where you are and where your clients, friends, relatives, whoever you might be talking to about this concept are in their life. Are they just getting started? Do they have a new job? They don't know if they like it or not yet. Are they in a new career that they might change? All those factors.
do they have the ability, at least a little bit of ability to fix a repair if they had to, right? Like that's where that planning comes into place that we talk about all the time, and the emergency fund, and having a little bit at least saved over and above what you're putting into your house, because there will be repairs. There will be maintenance. There will be expenses that you never thought about, because that's just life, right? So having a little bit saved so your credit cards don't become your emergency fund or your house repair fund, is important, I
Mhm.
think.
Yep. And
Ultimately, I think it comes down to your personal goals, like should you buy, should you rent? I think it all depends. I don't necessarily think it's a bad decision either way. It's just a decision that you have to make and know that you're comfortable with. And it's like anything else, right? It's that pros and cons list, and writing it all down and looking at it and evaluating and deciding, well, for me, it's better to buy because I want the stability and I want to be able to fix the things that I want to fix. I want to make the walls look the way that I want the walls to look, or the rent because I want to be able to move next year downtown Charleston, and then I want to move to James Island the next year, and then I want to move to Mount Pleasant, and then I'm going to move to New York City because I just want a minute in the city. And then, having that ability to be mobile and flexible, especially in today's world, right? A lot of our jobs are virtual. We can Zoom from wherever, right? So that kind of, to me, it puts a little excitement in it, that you don't have to stay in one place forever. You can move around and kind of be a nomad, if you will, for a minute.
Yeah, the trends are the reverse of the industrial revolution right now. I tell people when they're looking for real estate investments to find the end of the internet, basically find the end of the high speed internet line in an area that's nice and peaceful and quiet, and buy yourself a piece of property there, and you will not lose, because people are moving away from congestion, not towards it. And so, the internet's the big key there. As long as we have access to, high speed internet, and these people that can work from New York City. I mean, you don't have to live in Manhattan anymore to do most of the jobs in Manhattan. So you don't have to pay Manhattan rent. You can go out, and as long as you can log on to that Zoom meeting like we are right here, or you can, get online and see the meetings and talk to the customers, you can be anywhere in the world. So that factor has kind of, opened the doors for a lot of people to buy instead of rent. If you had a job and you're renting in Manhattan, you're probably not going to be able to buy the apartment in Manhattan that you're renting.
Probably
So
and a lot of it is location based,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
We were just in California for a couple of days, and we were talking to a girl that I guess she went to high school over here in Columbia, South Carolina, and she lives there now. And she's talking about maybe moving to Nashville or whatever. And we're talking about renting versus buying in California. She was like, "Oh, I'll never own a home here. Like it is not possible. I will never own a home here."
So
And
far
that's
out of my
probably
reach.
true,
Yeah.
So I do definitely think it depends on that. But ultimately, I think the conclusion is, it's got to be a personal decision. It's got to come with your personal preference. Renting may be better if you prioritize flexibility. It typically should have lower upfront cost and fewer responsibilities from a financial perspective moving forward. And buying may be better if you seek stability and that long-term investment and the potential for that property value to increase, but it might not be, right? You might have to move in the middle of 2008, or let's not say 2008, probably 2009 or 2010 when the market actually hit the bottom, and then you lose, right? And there's really no way to know. So it's like everything else, right? It's like it's make the best educated decision that you can and then move forward with your choices and own it. It is what it is. So I'm going to stop chatting with you guys for a minute. We've got about 2 to 3 minutes left before we wrap up for the day. So I'd love to hear any questions you have or any comments or any horror stories of renting versus buying. I'm sure, like I said earlier, that we all have them. So does anybody have anything that they want to share with us today? Any good moves, any bad moves? I know that you guys can talk because I've heard you talk before. So know that the floor is open.
I know we've had some
Ron, hello, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Good morning. Yeah, I think I like that conversation, particularly when it comes to purchase, housing and build. It seems like there's a big wave now in additional dwelling unit,
Mm-hmm.
small unit in the back of an existing houses. Now, when it comes to uh, interest rate, is that and that's the part that I'm trying to really, a few colleagues and friends are talking about that, but is this improve the entire house or the entire uh the property,
As far as
or
the
does it
value,
get taxed? Yeah, is it get taxed to the existing structure?
well, I
It's
think it
almost like when
depends.
they evaluate a house, they don't evaluate the basement. So I'm just trying to find out whether,
I
I
think it
mean, it's more of a
depends.
realistic question, though.
yeah.
Yeah, I think it depends. And I think it's a good conversation. I have a really good friend in Charleston that I'm begging and I will continue begging to get on this podcast because they have multiple properties. And that's one of the things that she said, instead of buying more properties, they're thinking about adding ADUs, accessory dwelling units. So that means, a garage with, we call them frogs over here, a finished room over the garage, right? That
We
she can
don't do
rent
basements
out
in the low
and
country.
things like, yeah, we don't have basements over here, that she can rent out and things like that. But I think that how does it affect the appraised value? And I actually have an appraiser, remind me, I could ask him
I think
too.
the
But
conversation there is like just generally, you can use traditional mortgages up to how many, like 4 units, a 4 unit property or two? Like if you're buying it and you're living in one unit and
But I
you're,
don't think it would be considered an additional unit. It wouldn't be like a duplex, right? It wouldn't be considered like a duplex. It would be the value of that entire property, including that accessory dwelling unit. And in the past, they didn't allow you to do that. But a
Right.
lot of the rules and guidelines have changed because it's so popular now. But the value would be determined on the entire property,
right.
including that accessory dwelling unit. But it has to also be comped, meaning compared with, right, on the
Okay.
appraisal,
Okay.
other properties that have sold recently with accessory dwelling units. If they have not sold, then they cannot compare it. So you might have a house with a garage and a house with an ADU, and they might not count that ADU. They might count it just like a garage if there's no other comparison out there to say, oh, this actually has more value because of these different pieces, right?
Got it.
Um,
One of the big factors that it would matter in, though, is taking into account the income that could come from that unit. So obviously, you're not going to be able to take that income into account to qualify to purchase the property.
Sometimes I think you can now.
But as far as an affordability standpoint, but one of the things that we've dealt with in a lot of the communities around Charleston is if you're thinking on using an Airbnb or a VRBO to rent that space, one vote of the city council can take that income away very, very quickly, because there are a lot of especially in condominiums and those kind of things around these areas that do not want short-term rentals, and so the environment for that politically can be something you want to look into. I know that we've looked at condos in Atlanta multiple times because we spend a lot of time over there on business. And one of the things we wanted was to be able to rent that out short term while we were not using it. And that greatly limits the search. So just make sure that anybody that's looking at short-term rentals or second rentals on their property knows the law and the situation in the area where they are, and make sure that they can do that.
I would just say make sure they can afford it either way.
Yep.
I mean, worst case scenario, instead of having it as a short-term rental, you could flip it to a long-term rental, and that would be allowed. But there are a lot of people that are getting into the midterm rental spaces, like with travel nurses and, people that are maybe building a house and they need somewhere for 6 months and, something like that. So that's a big market now too. You can go out and market to insurance companies and have them, somebody's house burned down and they're displaced for a minute, right? Like that's a big conversation. So it's interesting, there's so much opportunity in the world right now, whether it's in real estate and how do we use it as an investment portfolio, whether it's alternative streams of income. And, we've talked about coming to work with us and adding the financial services space to what you do, or we've talked about being an Amazon reseller. And I think it all goes back to step one on our financial plan when we talk to clients is, what do I need to do to prepare for retirement? And that's increase your income. And increasing your income comes from multiple streams of income, not just getting a raise at your job. It's great and all, but it also is that multiple streams of income. So I love your thought process and where you're going with it, for sure.
Hey, we got a lot of good topics that we can talk about in the future. We just opened up a bunch of pieces.
Yeah, I'd love to watch it again, write it all down.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah,
right.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ron.
We'll see you soon. All right, guys. Well, we are a couple of minutes over because we always like to go a couple of minutes over.
Seems like it.
But anyway, as we leave today on Monday, we thank you so much for joining us. Remember to like us and subscribe to us and follow us on YouTube at The Daily Huddle, and share us with your friends so everybody else can be our friends as well. But as we leave for the day, remember to love, laugh out loud, stress less, eat mostly plant-based and take care of your body, give, move, sleep. That was I think the best night of sleep I've had in a really, really long time. And did I say move?
You said sleep.
Move
Move
your body. And then check yourself before you wreck yourself. Take that pause between stimulus and response, and it can be 30 seconds or it can be 3 days, but just make sure that when you respond, it's how you want to respond and you're ready. That's the only part of it that you can control is that moment. So check yourself before you wreck yourself. And with that, we will see you guys tomorrow, same time, same place at the Daily Huddle. Thanks, guys.